Welcome to the Publish Her podcast, a place where you can come to get inspiration, motivation, help, encouragement, and support in your journey to write, publish, and sell your book. Hosted by Alexa Bigwharf.
'Cause I've been where you've been, and I felt what you're feeling, and I don't want to get in your way.
Welcome back to another episode of the Publish Her podcast. So, we talk about a whole bunch of different things on this podcast, everything from writing all the way through the marketing and launch and business growth and all of that kind of things. But one of the things that we do talk about a lot is editing, because editing is, such a crucial part of your journey from getting your pile of words into the final product that your audience is going to love and adore. And having just finalized my first novel and gone through about 875 rounds of editing through, just kidding, it wasn't quite that bad, but I went through the whole thing, through developmental edits, through line editing, copy editing, proofreading, the whole thing, because I really wanted to make sure that by the time the book got into the hands of readers, granted, it's my very first novel, so I know it's probably not going to be the best book they've ever read in their entire life, but I wanted it to be a good book that I was proud of. So editing is important, and we will continue talking with you about editing. And today we have an expert here to lay out some of the resolve some of the mystery around finding an editor. So I have Jenny Hubert here with me today. She's a freelance editor and writer based in the New York City area. She has edited #1 new releases on Amazon for fantasy authors. She is also the author of The Book Editor Matchmaker, a short ebook that teaches authors how to vet and hire a book editor. Her favorite authors are Jane Austen and Agatha Christie, and you can follow her for free editing tips on TikTok at sweeter_than_fiction and Instagram at grammar with Jenny. And I'll make sure all of these links and interesting things are in the show notes. So if you missed that, don't panic. We'll get it to you. Thank you so much for being here and welcome to the show. If I can speak today.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to chat editing with you today.
Yeah, so let's talk first about how you became an editor. It looks like you did you start as an author, or have you always been in the editing field? How did this all come about?
Yeah, so I have a degree in communications and writing. So writing is really where I started, but I've been editing for about 8 or 9 years, probably 9 years now, since we were in the fall. And I never sold my editing services until I lost my job during the pandemic.
Oh,
And
yes.
I needed a job. I needed a job where I could work from home. And because I lived in Florida and it wasn't super safe to go outside, so I thought of what of my services can I sell from home safely? And I thought about editing.
Uh-huh.
So I thought it was just, something that I was going to get by with until the pandemic ended. But my business just blew up. It turned out so many people wrote pandemic books.
Yes. Me being
And
one of
there
them.
was and there was a huge demand for book editors, and I just dove right into that demand. And I have been editing for about 2.5 years, or selling my editing for 2.5 years since then, and the demand has not stopped. And I just love fulfilling that need for authors.
Well, that's great. And good for you for being able to find something that you both love doing and can earn a living from, and is very helpful to all the authors out there who need this service. So you did write an ebook, The Book Editor Matchmaker. So let's talk about this. Your first chapter is what should I do before I research an editor, which I think is really important and something that a lot of people just don't know where to start. They know they need to find an editor, and I guess we can also, maybe it would be better to start off with just a quick description of how you know what kind of editing you want, and then we can talk about how you research an editor, because I think those kind of go hand in hand.
Oh, yeah. So there are 5 main types of editing that you could get. There's a manuscript critique, developmental editing, line editing, copy editing, and proofreading. Some authors choose to go through all 5. Some authors on a budget maybe will only do a few of them. But if you're looking to mimic the traditional publishing house process, then you most likely will need 4 or 5 types of editing. And I would say they kind of split into two categories. Manuscript critique and developmental editing is big picture advice, advice that helps tighten up your characters, your plot, make sure your hero is proactive, make sure there's tension and conflict. And that's what you have to get done first, because if you have a plot hole in your story, your readers will not let you forget it. So that's why it's so important to get that done first. And then once you're happy with your plot and characters, that's when you go with the other three types of editing, which is line, copy, and proofreading. And those really focus on your sentence structure and making sure all the facts in your story are correct. And then you want a proofreader to get rid of all those typos that track changes might have caused, or, looking at your story so many times, you might not see double words or something like that.
Right.
Yeah, so that's
So
pretty much, yeah. That's pretty much the types of editing that you're looking for um, in a story, that you're looking to get in a story. And knowing the order of those is crucial as well. Just, you want to focus on developmental first, and then everything that looks at sentence structure, which is line, copy, and proofreading.
perfect. I know when I was going through my editing journey, I started with a developmental editor, and we spent a lot of time just really making sure that all the holes were filled, that all the things were there, that I was giving enough background story, and or not too much background story, that I was creating the scene and the environment. And then when I moved into the copy and line editing, she told me very point blank, and I think I'm talking about this because I think it's important for authors to understand that the role of an editor is not to get you to, like, this may be a controversial statement, but the role of an editor is not to get you to a perfect book necessarily. It's to get you that next step up from where you were. Of course, if you want to go through round after round after round after round, you could probably get your book to the perfect point. But my editor was very clear with me. She was like, my goal is to get this book 10 to 15% better than it was when it came to me, because, perfectionism is one of those things. But I hear a lot of authors who are like, I had my book edited 6 times and we still found errors. So I'm curious, when you're working with authors, or when you're helping them find the perfect editor, or working on their books yourself, what is your philosophy around this?
Oh, that is such a good question, because it's something I used to be super hard on myself um, when a typo would be found in a book. Like sometimes the authors will send me a copy of their book and I leaf through it and I'm like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe that was there. But yeah, I don't think it should be controversial at all, and humans are not perfect, and our characters are not perfect, so why should a book be perfect? Yeah, it's something I used to be really hard on myself for, but every good editor, if you notice, like in their contract, they'll say something like, my services cannot bring your book to 100%
Mm-hmm.
quality, and editing is subjective.
Yes.
What someone thinks is going to be perfect may not be perfect to another person. And when I've hired my own editors, almost every single person has that little like disclaimer, like my goal is to not make your book absolutely perfect. It's to bring it up to the next level, or to
Right.
make it like 90%
Right.
accurate or
Right.
something like that.
Well, and I think it's interesting because most of the people listening to this podcast, not everyone, but a lot of us are self-publishing, or indie authors, or going with small presses or things like that. So I think one of the biggest differences between indie authors and a lot of the ones who go with a big traditional publishing house is craft development, I would say. Like we come in, and what I mean by that is that a lot of us are writing our first or second book, like we're still learning the craft. We might not have been doing all the things that someone who's been, perfecting their craft for a long time is doing. So a lot of times, in my discussions with other editors, a lot of times they'll get a book that what it really needs in that first round of developmental editing is like a writing coach to get
Mm-hmm.
them, because they're newer. That's not a slam on anybody. That's just like, it takes so much to get to that level of development. And so I think it's important for indie authors to recognize that the that the process can be longer and there may be more stages, and it may be difficult for an editor to get you so far because they can only work with what you've given them. And some people need a lot more help than others. I needed a lot of help with my first fiction. I'm used to writing nonfiction,
Mhm.
very clinical, very fact-based, very, this is this and this is this. And to now create emotions and attachment to characters and really good scene development, like I needed a lot of writing support. So that expectation of the on the editor, I think it's unfair sometimes that people go in expecting that editor's going to take their work and poof, magic, make it perfect, but at least make it a lot better.
Something I learned in one of my editing courses that I've taken is how to not overwhelm your client when you
Uh-huh.
are giving advice, because if you give them this like huge editorial letter that completely overwhelms them, then they're going to put their book down and never look at it again.
Oh, this is
So
true. Yes.
editors have to be great at giving you advice that is manageable, that's achievable.
Yes.
And if you just tell them every single thing that's wrong with their book, then they're going to be like, that's it, I can't do it. But giving them the first steps is what's so important, because then they'll be able to go from there and from there and from there and so on.
Yeah.
Um,
I love that because it is overwhelming. I remember when I got the first round of developmental edits back, I had to step away for like 6 weeks. Like I didn't know how to process it because I'd been working on the book for 2 years, and I knew when I sent it to her, I knew that it was far from ready to go to, the next line of editing. Like I knew there was a lot of work that needed to go into it. But even so, like just seeing all the comments and all the feedback, I was like, oh my gosh, this is going to take me forever. But taking that time off was really, really healthy for me because one, I'd given myself a long enough timeline that I could. Two, it was a really busy time in my life because I got them back in January and our conference runs in March. So we were really, really busy. But three, it gave me the time to let all of her feedback soak in. And even though I didn't realize it, I was processing all of this and thinking about it. And by the time I came back to it, I was able to do that in a really healthy way and not be so like, "Nee, nee, 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 nee," and why does she want me to change all this stuff and why all that. It was like really like, okay, I see where she's coming from. I get this. And remember, your editor is your friend and your partner, to help you get your book better, not to tear you down.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I think I mentioned a story like that in the introduction of my ebook where she got like a general evaluation of like one of my clients got a general evaluation of the first few chapters of her book, and an editor came back at her and said, oh my gosh, this is terrible, like flat out said it was like
Oh
terrible.
my
But
gosh.
yeah, and she put her manuscript away for months because she believed these editors' comments.
Oh
And that's
no.
something that's so scary,
That
that's
is
why it's so
scary.
important to find like a good editor, because that could prevent a book from going out into the world. And now this author has like hundreds of reviews on her book, mostly 5 stars. And
Wow.
I'm so happy that she pushed past that one opinion.
Yeah, that's really
And
wonderful.
yeah.
So let's get into that then. So let's talk about your ebook. And now that we kind of have an idea, I sidetracked our conversation so much there, but sometimes I feel like, we go into these interviews and we just talk about, okay, what's developmental editing? What's line editing? What's copy editing?
Mm-hmm.
But we don't spend a whole lot of time talking about the mindset and what's actually happening when you're going through editing and what it feels like to send it off and to get it back and to be like, oh my gosh. So I just wanted to spend a little bit of time commiserating with people there before we go into
Yeah.
like and it also makes the perfect bridge for when you're looking for an editor, what do you need? And what I needed was a cheerleader, somebody who knew my genre well enough that they knew what was normal and abnormal enough, to give me the right guidance, somebody who was totally on board with the book with me and really was excited about working with me, but somebody who was also like not going to do something like that to me that completely derailed me. So I almost had like a personality type that I was looking for more so than their editing skills, but
Mm-hmm.
how do you find that perfect match for when you're getting started?
Yeah, there's so many factors that create a great editor. And I think you mentioned one of the most important parts, which is genre. You know, you
Yes.
want to find an editor that works within your genre. It's not completely necessary. There's no rule book saying that you have to find an editor that works within your genre. But you know, I personally want to work with an author who knows their genre so that I know
Yes.
what to expect.
Yes.
Some authors come up to me and they're like, I don't know, it could be fantasy, it could be science fiction, could be nonfiction. Those really throw me for a
Right.
loop. So knowing the difference between fiction and nonfiction first is really important. And then um knowing your genre subgenre. I don't think a lot of authors realize that. I mainly edit like fantasy, but I also want to know their subgenre. Is it a dark
Yeah.
fantasy? Is it urban fantasy? Is it a fairy tale? Like stuff like that. Um, because I want to work with authors who know their genre well and can be familiar with the tropes and what kind of like what you
Yes.
said, what's normal, what's abnormal, what's the word count gonna look
Yes.
like, stuff like that.
Yeah, I think it's really important because I know along the journey my editor was she was making references to other books that I might want to read as well, to get a feel for what I was trying to do with things. She knows the genre and the time period really well, enough to help guide me as I'm developing as a writer too, which I know that's not something that all editors do, but but it's a nice touch when they're able to do that, and they only can do that if they're familiar with the genre you're writing in.
I actually just I'm working on a cozy fantasy right now, but
Oh, I
she
did not know that
originally
was a thing.
yeah. So my client pitched it to me as a fantasy. And then I did usually I read a book first all the way through.
Mhm.
And then I kind of like give like my general thoughts. And then it wasn't until like she came back to me and was like, "Oh, I was thinking that, I got critiques from my beta readers that this is a cozy fantasy." And that completely changed my mindset because fantasy is usually super high stakes, like
Right.
someone's life is always at risk. But cozy fantasy is more about relationships and just going through like day-to-day situations, but still having conflict and tension.
Right.
And that completely shaped my advice
Yeah.
for my client because now I know that she wants lower stakes and I'm not
Right.
going to give advice that increases the stakes because she wants lower stakes. So why would I
Right.
give advice that would completely change the structure of her novel? So just even adding like a subgenre like that is just so important in shaping how I'm going to look at your book.
Yeah, completely agree. So what are some of the when obviously determining the type of editing that you need, knowing some of the things that you want to look for in an editor. How do they go about finding you? So they know, okay, I'm writing fantasy. I need a developmental editor for fantasy. How what's the next step?
Yeah, so there's a lot of resources you can find an editor, where you can find an editor. And my main advice for first time authors is to go through the Editorial Freelancers Association
Okay.
or Readsy. Of course, the best way is an author referral. Um, Learning from your author friends who they liked and why they liked them. But sometimes we don't always have author friends, or they might have had a bad experience with an editor, so we don't always, trust the choices that they say. But if you're starting
Sure.
completely from a blank slate and you have no idea where to look for an editor, I would definitely say the Editorial Freelancers Association and Readsy because they have a bunch of little boxes that you can check off.
Hmm.
And there is some editor out there who matches all your qualifications. It's like bizarre.
That's a good tool. Yeah, I like
Yeah.
Readsies. I did not think about sending people to the Editorial Freelancers Association. That's a great resource.
Yeah, it's basically the same thing as Readsy, except it's like a pay to play platform where the editors pay a membership, and that's
Hmm.
how it kind of gives them a little bit more seriousness to, if they're paying for a membership, it shows that they're serious about their craft. I personally like that. When I look for editors, I look at both of those websites and just
Yeah,
click all the boxes. It's really fun. And you'd be surprised how there's someone that just pops up that has like your exact qualification that you need.
absolutely. All right. So I guess then my last question would be, if someone in our audience is writing, you're looking for fantasy primarily, right? Do you edit any other genres?
Yeah, I edit most genres, but my main focuses are fantasy, science fiction, contemporary, and historical fiction.
Oh,
Um,
cool.
yeah, and I tend to stay away from romance like
Mhm.
as a genre only because I don't read it often and I'm not as familiar with the tropes.
Yeah,
So that's kind of going back to what I was saying before, like, I'm not going to edit in a genre I'm not super familiar with. So yeah, I like to stay more towards the the big settings and magical elements and something that's different from our world. But I love reading contemporary, so I edit contemporary as well.
fair enough. And how do people find you and reach out to you for a quote?
Yeah, so there's a few ways. My main way is through my website, jennyhubertedits.com. That has a description of all my services and it gives you a solid way to reach out to me. Because I know some authors try to reach out to me on TikTok or Instagram, and those messengers are so glitchy. So
Yeah.
I really prefer an email through my website. The only thing is that sometimes my responses will go to spam. So I have a little message that says if you don't hear from me in 72 hours, check your spam. Um, but that's definitely the most official way. I give you prompts to answer,
Hmm.
and it's like a little mini questionnaire just to make sure that, we're the right fit for each other. So that would definitely be the strongest way.
Perfect. All right. Well, I enjoyed this conversation very much. I think it's always fun to talk to other experts in the industry and bring a little bit of a different side of things to our authors. So thank you so much for your time, and
Thank you, Alexa.
I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
You don't have to give me your heart. You don't have to give it away. You don't
Thank you for joining us on the Publisher Podcast. We hope to see you back for the next episode. Great, huge thanks goes to Jasmine Commerce for the use of her song. You can find Jasmine on SoundCloud. Go check out all of her music. We'll see you next time.